Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. Today is Wednesday. Our new co-host, Will Selber, is joining us. Will's my friend and colleague. A man wears many hats, a retired Middle East foreign area officer. He's a contributor to The Bulwark, proprietor of Grumpy Combat Veterans. You guys should go over to Substack and subscribe. He also hosts other podcasts, Shoulder to Shoulder, the untold stories from a forgotten war, and Stories from My Brothers, Tales of the Afghan Security Forces. Will, happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today.
Man, it's always a pleasure. Did anything happen over the last 24 hours?
Yep.
I don't know.
Nah,
it just seems like nothing. We're going to have
struggling.
to strain to figure out what we should talk about. I look
Exactly.
forward to where this could go.
Yeah, we were just really, before this began, we're like, what are we going to talk about today? Nothing is going on. So this is kind of like our throwaway podcast today. And so for our throwaway podcast, also my friend and colleague at FDD, Behnam Taleblu, he's a senior fellow there. He focuses on Iranian security and political issues. And if you want to know what's happening in the region, just listen to Behnam, read what Behnam's writing. Also, Joe Truzman, he's an editor at FDD's Long War Journal. He's a senior research analyst at FDD's Long War Journal, focuses on Palestinian terror groups, Hezbollah, and also knows when I want to find out, I go to Joe's Twitter feed, go to @Joe Truzman. You could get the up-to-date of what's going on in the region. Behnam and Joe are also co-hosts, but today they're guests for today's podcast because nothing's happening. And we figured we would just have a bullshit session today. Yeah, right? All right. Well, guys, it was a great podcast. Let's catch you next week. Well, obviously, we're making light of the very serious events that have occurred over the last 24 hours. So yesterday kicks off with a airstrike in Beirut that kills a senior Hezbollah military commander, Fuad Shukr. He's a wanted by the U.S. for his involvement in the 1983 Marine barracks bombings. Killed over, I believe it was 241 Marines and I believe over 40 French soldiers in two separate attacks. By the way, just a little side note on that. That's where Al-Qaeda was inspired to carry out its embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. Al-Qaeda went and trained with Hezbollah and got critical information to execute those attacks. So my guess is Shukr had some involvement with Al-Qaeda as well, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. So he had a $5 million bounty on his head. Certainly interesting. So that's massive news. The Israelis, after suffering that attack that killed 12 Druze children in northern Israel late last week, you figure in, wow, this is the revenge attack for that. And then I fell asleep early last night, wake up to my phone blown up, turn my phone off, and I'm like, holy shit. They killed Haniyeh, the political chief of Hamas in Tehran, as he's there for the inauguration of Iran's president. So the Israelis were pretty damn busy over the last 24 hours. The strike that killed Shukr, that's a massive attack right there. He's considered to be Hassan. I'll let Joe and Behnam talk more about Shukr and his importance, but the military advisor to Hassan Nasrallah, the general secretary of Hezbollah. Some describe him as the number 3. Everybody's the number 3 in these terrorist organizations. I guess that's the combination of the taking a piss and a bowel movement for these guys. And
I thought you were going to say it's the combination of the Israelis and the Americans hammering away at numbers 1, 2, and 4.
That too. Yeah. So this is just that alone a massive news story. The intelligence that goes into these operations that's required. But then getting Haniyeh incredible. Let's talk about the Haniyeh strike first. Behnam, I'm going to turn to you first. What do we know about that attack? How was it executed? And what does this say about security in the heart of the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Let's just begin with the very necessary comment. Holy,
yeah.
Insert.
Yeah. No, this is going to be an expletive laden podcast today. I'm
glad I'm taking this one from the office too, so my colleagues hear everything.
Let them know you're just doing it for the team, Behnam. You know, you swear away.
Absolutely, there could be no other way. Listen, this whole thing reminds me of this quote. You know, just a repository of crazy quotes now. By a former Iranian intelligence minister. I think he was the intelligence minister under Hassan Rouhani, the guy before Alavi. And he said, I think his name was Ali Younisi. And he said, no Iranian security official should sleep soundly or safely at night. And he was talking about how punctured at that time, actually, the regime's security services and security apparatuses. There's lots of reasons for that. They may prioritize defending something else. They have bureaucratic fights between different branches or segments of the IRGC and the MOIS, the Ministry of Intelligence, that when they promote, particularly for the IRGC, they promote based on zeal rather than competence. So you get a very different kind of upper echelon. Mid-level management looks very different in Tehran than it might in Langley for that reason. And I'm not just talking about the clothing. But all of these factors conspire to point this larger story that we've all been watching, where you get like 5 or 6 assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists. One was attempted on the former head of the Atomic Energy Organization. The suspicious death, I think back in 2011, of the father of Iran's ballistic missile program. The theft of the atomic archive, the whole series of nuclear and military sites that went, boom in the night. Some of them were, just mere acts of electronic espionage and cyber sabotage. Others were actually kinetic, quadcopter drone attacks. And then most recently on April 19th, the striking of a radar facility defending a major nuclear site. So this is the Israelis once again, I think, foot stomping, perhaps some might even say curb stomping, that they have this capability. Most recently in the speech Bibi just gave, very quickly, short, sharp speech, he mentioned that Israel had been involved in the attack in Beirut, but did not specifically mention Ismail Haniyeh's name, to the best of my knowledge. That could be designed to downplay some of the Iranian desire to respond here. But all we know from the Iranian press is thus far the timing of the operation. It was in the wee hours of the morning, so it was well after the swearing-in ceremony, which is what had brought not just Haniyeh, but many other leaders from the axis of resistance, like Naim Qassem of Hezbollah, to the Iranian parliament that day. And this is, in my view, likely a target of opportunity by the Israelis. I'm happy to get into that. It's Arab media instead that is pointing us in the direction of how this may have been pulled off. There aren't really many on social media, videos, pictures of the facility, because it's not just believed to be a random house for this guy. It was largely believed to be a kind of a secret IRGC compound, if you will, or designed to blend in. So we don't have exact geolocation as to where this event took place, but Arab media is talking about this as a missile strike rather than an assassin. So that's worth chewing over.
Yeah, and I'm going to just point out a couple of other successful assassinations. We know it's by the Israelis. August 7th, 2020, on this 22nd anniversary of the East Africa embassy bombings, Kenya and Tanzania, which I'd mentioned earlier, with the Israelis killed Abu Muhammad al-Masri. He was Al-Qaeda's deputy emir at the time, and is one of the conspirators in the embassy bombings. He was gunned down, I believe, with his daughter was with him at the time. And then a couple of months later, in November of 2020, Moshe, I'm going to butcher his last name, Fakir. There you go. I had it right, Behnam. I had it right. He was a leading figure in the nuclear weapons program. May 2022, Colonel Sayed Kodai. Is that correct, Behnam? Did I pronounce that correct? Kodai. Yeah, he was the deputy commander of Unit 840. basically IRGC's external assassination / covert operations branch. He was also shot and killed in Tehran. So the Israelis have a incredible, and not just an intelligence network, but an operations arm that is really has its hooks into Tehran. That's impressive. So, Will, I'm going to turn to you. You've done some intelligence work in your history. How do you rate these operations, particularly this morning's operations? What exactly does it take, not just to gather the intelligence, but to pull off that we don't really know how it was carried out, but
at the bare minimum, you have to have. For the strike in Lebanon, I would imagine, the amount of signals intelligence and they were able to do to pinpoint, probably with a deep human intelligence network that they probably have, to pinpoint and to triangulate that. I mean, it's impressive. Just right on that one is difficult. It's a difficult strike where these Lebanese, these Hezbollah commanders are going to go. I don't know enough about his pattern of life, but that itself is a difficult strike. Now you're going to escalate it even harder. I mean, Iran is a very difficult country to operate in, to have intelligence in. You have to have really good tradecraft, and you have to have somebody that is able to just blend in and provide the type of human intelligence reconnaissance that you have to have on the ground, people that are working that. And then also, SIGINT, if you have it, but in my opinion, it's also going to be a heavy type of human intelligence network that you're going to have in Tehran that's able to do that. It just depends on the type of assassination kind of, but it's still going to be heavy with that, in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, look, and just for the listeners, the Iranians, they have a professional intelligence organization. Yes. We're not saying anything that they aren't acutely aware of at this point in time.
Yes.
But real quick, back to you. In those previous assassinations, particularly the most recent ones, are we aware of any Israeli intelligence assets being rolled up after these attacks?
There are often reports of them. It's very hard to discern, particularly from semi-official and official state media, when these are things against regular Iranian dissidents, when these are either fabricated pieces of pieces of misinformation or disinformation that the regime puts out. Most importantly, to signal strength and resolve at home to domestic audiences, not just to regime elites, but to current dissidents and would-be one-day dissidents that the state security services is punctured. And this security-insecurity paradox, this strength and weakness paradox, runs through the 45-year history of the Islamic Republic. Conventionally weak, asymmetrically strong, good at foreign operations abroad, can barely secure the terrain here at home. It's such a paradox.
Yes.
And just to second or underline one thing Will said, sometimes art imitates life, and sometimes life imitates art. Here, I do think if you go back to the TV show Tehran, running through that is a whole series of disaffected persons. Dissidents might be even going too far, but disaffected persons by the regime and even by the security establishment that end up in the course of the TV show, again, this is just a TV show, lending support to a foreign adversary of the Islamic Republic of Iran because they believe it is the nationalist and patriotic thing to do. It's a very interesting intellectual squaring of the circle. And in this sense, I think the vast majority, I have no evidence, but the vast majority of many of the recent things that have gone boom in the night and that were not cyber, but that were kinetic, as well as the targeted assassinations, benefited from either local intel and recon rather than high-level, ISR, expensive assets. I think this is a lot of the old-fashioned tradecraft stuff coming to bring itself up to the fore again. I can't prove it, but it's just a hunch.
I couldn't agree with you more, Behnam, and you as well, Will. Whoever pulled this off has a set of balls size of wrecking balls.
When I woke up, I just was like, oh, I hat tipped. I mean, it's a pleasure to for me as an old intel officer who's been around some of this stuff at different places. I mean, when you see somebody able to pull something like this off, just X's and O's, you're like, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, Will texted me this morning. Bill, is this going to be another downer episode? And I said, absolutely not. No, this is one where you got, like you said, well, we got to tip the hat. This is not one, but two highly successful operations in the last 24 hours. Joe, I've been waiting patiently. Talk to us about the strike that killed Shukr. Tell us a little bit about him, his history, his importance within Hezbollah, and how is Hezbollah responding to this killing?
Yeah, we talked about a little bit about Shukr's background already. His responsibility, or he was responsible for. I guess if I recall correctly, I was reading the IDF statement yesterday that he had orchestrated and planned I think it was 83 the bombing of the Marine barracks, the barracks in Beirut. But also, this is a guy that has moved up in the ranks of Hezbollah, right? I mean, he was at the point where he was a member of the Jihad Council. It's the highest military council in Hezbollah. The Israelis allege that he was Hassan Nasrallah's right-hand man. So this guy he's up there. This guy's. And also, more importantly, they said that he is responsible for the attack, right, on Majd al-Shams that killed 12. 11 children and I think one 20-year-old young man. But nevertheless, he's a bad guy, right? If there was a guy to get, right, it was Shukr. For sure, right? And I'm sure there's some people in the United States that are smiling today, right? That are happy to hear his demise. So, it's good for the Israelis. Now we wait, right? Well, how does Hezbollah respond? Because interestingly, even though this happened yesterday, right? It wasn't until actually about 30 minutes ago that Hezbollah officially said that Shukr was killed.
Oh, wow.
They published his martyr poster. Of course, they published photos of him, one of them with Soleimani, of course. No surprise there. And obviously this guy was a top man. And from what I've read so far, at least with Ismail Haniyeh, both funerals are going to take place tomorrow. Hassan Nasrallah is supposed to speak as well tomorrow. So that's what is expected. And I bring this up because now everyone's waiting. What's the response, right? And we can talk more about it after. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But Shukr there was again a bad guy in Hezbollah to get. It was him, absolutely. So impressive.
I put him up there with the Musa Ali Daktuk, the Hezbollah commander who helped build the Iraqi militias. At that level, wow. Just the top tier, nasty, long history. I go back to whenever we start talking about these guys and their histories. One of my favorite movies of all time, weird one, but Grosse Pointe Blank. If you haven't seen it, John Cusack as his girlfriend, his estranged girlfriend that he left 10 years. She finds out he's an assassin. And he says to her, "You should look at the resume of these guys. It reads like a demon's list or something to that effect." And I always go back to that scene. It's just perfect, right? He's explaining we're killing people, but these are bad guys, and that's Shukr and guys like Daktuk and Haniyeh. These are people who deserve it. And I would just say, Nasrallah, I hope he's not speaking from a bunker. Maybe he'll get, because the Israelis should be queuing up some missiles for some further strikes. He certainly is deserving. But, want to put the theory out there, this to everyone. I'll start with you, Will. Shukr, I think he was an excellent target for the Israelis, given his history with the Marine barracks bombing. It kind of insulates any criticism from the Biden administration, which wants to keep a lid on a widening war. The war is already widened. We've argued this numerous times here at Generation Jihad because of his history,
sure.
Because of Do you think that's the case?
I mean, I don't. I would agree with your theory. I mean, he provides somebody that the Israelis to kill that has battlefield effects that is significant, while also protecting them from probably some maybe some political criticism. I know that Secretary of Defense Austin said that they were, I think he recently said today that they were still going to, respond to any type of attack on Israel. But yeah, that makes sense to me. You pick that guy because he also has American blood on his hand, and you insulate yourself from a political attack. It's smart if that's what it is. It's a good selection, a good target identification. Whoever briefed that to the decision makers, very nicely done.
And to the Israeli intelligence, Musa Ali Dakduk, he's got American blood on his hand too. Lots of it from building those militias. Yes. He was in our custody.
Yes,
we let him go.
Yep.
Put him on the list. He's insulation from U.S. criticism.
A lot of American blood.
Yep. Behnam, your thoughts on that theory?
I think it's like a cocktail. It's a combination of forces, but this is probably the biggest one. And just like Will was saying, this is the politics of the moment. The fact that there's this $5 million, I think it's $5 million reward, the fact that this guy has American blood on his hands, it eases the case with the Americans who are talking about having a contradictory mission in the Middle East. You hear the Biden administration constantly saying de-escalation and deterrence. But the irony is that if you go for de-escalation, you undermine your deterrence. If you go for deterrence, you're likely going to have to entertain several escalation cycles. And perhaps one way to get the Americans to square the circle and perhaps not throw a fit about this highly relevant targeted killing is by saying, we're going after someone you wanted as well. So I think this is maybe one reason here, or perhaps the biggest reason, the biggest ingredient in this cocktail, far beyond target of opportunity and far beyond tit for tat with the Majd al-Shams attack that explains Israel's targeting. But just planting this flag and just pivoting a little bit, as people are talking about the impact of the Haniyeh killing, I wanted to ask you guys if it's okay. Pros and cons, political leaders versus field operatives. We have this conversation often about the killing the number threes. For me, the Haniyeh attack was about introducing the shock. The shock factor stuns the adversary. You get them to wobble a little bit. You get them to have to take a different measure of your resolve. And also, particularly when we're talking about politics, guys, to your own population, to the Israeli public, which has been really demoralized and really divided. I know unity is really the theme since post-October 7, but divided over which war should be escalated, the Hezbollah war or the Hamas war. At what point in time do you take a deal? At what point in time do you stop? At what point in time is there a ceasefire? At what point is going too far that might rupture ties with America? This might restore baseline Israeli faith in the security services when there will be more coming out, not less, about some of their failures pre and post October 7. So point. For Haniyeh, there's also this logic, this localized logic, and this signaling logic, which is different than the logics we're talking about for going after Shukr.
Joe, go ahead, take that first, and then Will.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think in Behnam, I think we talked about this before. I think you phrased it really well. I can't remember exactly how you said it, but how Israel lost deterrence, right, on October 7th. And I mean, one could make the argument that Israel's deterrence was eroding before October 7th, but now we see the strike, right? I mean, Shukr and of course, and Haniyeh. So maybe what Israel's doing in part here too is restoring that deterrence that it lost. So I think that's important, right? I think Israel has a long way to go. All right. We'll see what the response will be from Hezbollah, Iran, and the other resistance, axis of resistance partners. But I think it's one thing I want to emphasize. Israel's trying to restore deterrence here. But it's really one of the biggest things I think should be pointed out.
Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the only thing that I would maybe add is that I think the morale factor of what this could do for, people in Israel, I think that it could be maybe a little stiffening of the resolve to see that type of stuff. it's always good for morale when you're able to reach out and kill one of your enemies in like your primary adversary's capital. I mean, that's just, hey, that's always good for morale. I mean, who knows what's going to come next? I just think that it's also humiliating for the Iranians. I mean, he killed that guy after the wasn't it like the presidential inauguration, basically?
Yes.
I mean, like, talk about weak. I mean, right? You can't even protect this guy when he's after a big thing happened. I mean, it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I'll weigh in here as well. I view this as a good start.
Yeah, sure.
Tracking now, look, it's a little bit different with I'll use the drone campaign in Pakistan, the U.S. drone campaign to target Al Qaeda and Taliban leaders. It was effective. I always said it was necessary, but not sufficient to kill these leaders. I think part of the problem is if you don't kill enough of them fast enough to cause some type of collapse, then you're just taking out people. Haniyeh has been Secretary General for Hamas for how long? Anyone know the answer to that one, Joe?
I think since 2017, around there. I mean, he's held several senior positions.
Right.
They've kind of changed, and then he moved out of Gaza. It's kind of complicated, but he's been in a senior position for many years, actually, much longer than 2017.
Yeah, so he's got a replacement, and there's others to replace the end of Shukr. He's been in the game for 40 years, right? There is someone to replace him. So to me, the key is maintain the pressure. Then what Behnam had mentioned, right? There are political ramifications. Do we alienate the U.S.? I think the Israelis, the most important thing for them right now is to restore deterrence, to make the Iranians pay a price. That's what they haven't done since this war began. They have not made the Iranians pay a price. Sure, they've killed a general here, a person there, they've killed some key people, but they were all done in Syria or Lebanon until today with Haniyeh taken out. And they have to continue with attacks in Iran as well. The Iranians, Will mentioned it. All of us have mentioned this. It's painful. It's embarrassing. It shatters the illusion of invincibility for the Iranians, that we can direct the attacks, we control the pace of the operations, the attacks that are occurring in Israel on a daily basis, but we the Iranians don't pay a price for that personally. The Iranians will fight to the last Houthi, the last Iraqi, the last Lebanese, and the last Palestinian, but maybe make them feel a price.
That's because the Iranians don't really have any Iranians to die for them. That's one of the paradoxes. The fact that it's all foreign forces means that they don't really have much of a domestic constituency. I mean, there's real questions. Go back to the reporting from the Fakhrizadeh period, the 2020. There was a really good BBC piece that did this, investigative deep dive that went back to 2010. So a decade from that major attack. And they said that there were even wards of Evin prison, that famous political prison in Tehran, where there were IRGC folks basically put out there. And these are basically the disgruntled folks. We're not talking about lay people. These are basically disgruntled regime-adjacent folks that may be those on-roads for some of these very creative operations. So yes, expose the underbelly. Yes, show them where the real weaknesses are. But this is a regime born of those weaknesses. And the question is really for me right now, trying to figure out what the Iranians may do, is what is more dangerous or escalatory to them? Going after several major IRGC officials abroad, but allegedly on Iranian territory because of the consulate, not consulate drama, or actually in your territory, but of someone that may perhaps be expendable. What drives you to escalate versus what drives you to absorb? And then here's also something we need an answer to that we can infer and we can intonate, but we simply don't know. You guys are talking about the embarrassment factor for Tehran. Does Iran see these as gains made by Israel tactically, but as the regime is achieving a bigger strategic win, vis-a-vis the world in Israel, vis-a-vis the way it thinks things are going in Gaza. I mean, it is totally possible that the regime thinks it's winning, partly because it's drunk the Kool-Aid of its own ideology, but partly because the region is not particularly solvable. Like, you have to engage in, this is still more mowing of the grass. The Israelis talked about and continue to prove that they don't want to manage the situation after October 7. They want to solve it. But a lot of this stuff looks like a different caliber of managing. And this is the real paradox. Sorry to throw that wrench in there.
No, that's exactly what we're talking about here. This is why I think this is the time for the Israelis to ratchet up the pressure. Again, we're going to hear the argument, well, the war is widening. Israel has multiple fronts. They're already there, in my estimation. Just a quick note, our excellent producer, Danielle, cued me in on this. I wasn't aware of this. There is a report that now this is unconfirmed, that a brigadier general in the IRGC, his name is Amir Ali Hajizada, he's the commander of the IRGC aerospace forces, may have been killed
Holy cow.
in an airstrike in Syria, in near Damascus. Now, again, unconfirmed, but if true, it looks, if this is true, those would be 3 pretty high profile kills for the Israelis. And again, unconfirmed, really want to be clear about that. If so, we're looking at, they hit the IRGC, the Hamas and Hezbollah in the span of 24 hours. Again, unconfirmed report on Hajizada, but that would be significant if true.
Call me crazy. If this is true, it would be more significant, in my view, to kill Hajizadeh than it would be to kill Ghani, the head of the Quds Force. Because Ghani is no Soleimani, but Hajizadeh has played an intimate role in the evolution of all of these long-range strike capabilities, all of this stuff that makes deterrence and disarming and defanging and all the missions that we would like to have with the Islamic Republic, to kind of put it, quote-unquote, back in a box, even harder. This guy has been talking since, I think, 2009 or 10, when he entered the Aerospace Force's leadership, that Khamenei personally tasked him with the precision project that we now see really taking off. This guy's intimately involved. His signature is on nuclear documents for the tunneling for what eventually became the Fordo facility, per the nuclear archives. I remember when the good ISIS people, David Albright, whatever, were going through those documents, and we saw Hajizadeh's signature in Persian on those documents. And this was going back to 2002. This is how intimately involved this guy is. He was part of the IRGC procurement efforts in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war to get missiles from North Korea. This guy is, you talk about the flying tubes of Tehran. This guy is part of that story.
Interesting. I mean, and look at, what are we talking about on all 3 of these guys? And again, the reports of his death unconfirmed. Interesting that these reports came out yesterday before Haniyeh was killed. So, for what that's worth. Sometimes you see reports like this, people start piling on. There was a report that the head of the RGC, Khani, was killed in Iraq. But I find that to be, I didn't even want to mention that, because it's very likely he would have been in Tehran for the presidential inauguration. So, but again, he does travel there. But that all of these guys, talking 30, 40 plus years of experience. This is what the Israelis have to contend with. The fact that they're still alive, and are able to get multiple decades of experience under their belts. That's why the Israelis, that's why I say these are good kills and they're necessary. My question always is it sufficient? What about their deputies? Yeah, maybe they're not quite as good, but there's certainly the IRGC and the Islamic Republic of Iran have laid a foundation that is strangling Israel, in my estimation. Anyway, I'll throw that out there for what you guys think.
I tend to
go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
I tend to agree. I don't want it to agree, but I just I'm always happy to see these guys get killed. Nobody's happier than me, but it doesn't change like the basic fundamentals on the battlefield of where all the rest of these people are, and their in my opinion, and their strength and how they're arrayed on the battlefield. Is it good? Always good. Kill more of them? Yeah, sure. Go right ahead. But these type of assassinations will not change overall how they're able to function. I mean, they might dip a little bit here and there. They might not be able to shoot the rockets as fast, but like they'll be able to figure it out, if that makes sense.
And Joe, what's your estimation of the impact on any type of ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, given that they killed Haniyeh?
Right. So, yeah, I've been definitely asked that question a few times already today. And, I'll say this. There's some factors here that play. Obviously, Haniyeh is the leader of Hamas abroad, or the diaspora, however you want to call it. He was involved in ceasefire negotiations. I think now Hamas is going to do what they expect, what you would expect. They're going to, say this negotiations are off, blah 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 blah, and they're going to keep quiet for a while. But at the end of the day, we have to see how Hamas is functioning in the Gaza Strip, right? In more than 9 months now, they're getting beat. All right, the Israelis are reaching their commanders. They reached what we all believe is Mohammed Deif just a few weeks ago. They got to him, and now we're waiting on Sinwar, right? So I think at the end of the day, Hamas is going to come back. All right, go to the negotiating table. Right, the ceasefire talks. I think they will. They're in a position where they have not been ever, right? They've lost a leader, right? And on top of that, they're fighting for their existence. Their very survival in the Gaza Strip, all right? So these are two significant factors. I think they're going to bring them back to the table eventually. Maybe not in the next few weeks, right? We got to see the response and for things to die down. But at the end of the day, I think they'll come back to it, to be honest with you.
Will, you recently traveled to Israel and spoke to many Israelis. Do you think it's wise for the Israelis to negotiate a ceasefire with Hamas, or should they continue to press?
Oh, God. That's a tough question, man. I don't know. That's the answer. In my perfect world, they would just continue just grinding on them, and they would just put a stranglehold over the entire thing and just go from one. I mean, I talked to some retired generals, and they talked to me, they were like, well, once we're done with Rafah, then we're going to go through, and we're going to go through, and we're going to go through, and we're going to continue to do that. And if they're able to do that and pull that off, then like, don't do the ceasefire. But like, it's also not my country, and like, I understand what the hostages mean to them, and there's an emotional response to that. And I'm not an Israeli, so I can't make that decision. But yeah, I'm always in favor of getting them yourself, so you don't put yourself over a barrel again for when the next you release even more prisoners who then come back, and then we're back here again in 10 years. But I get it. I understand their predicament. It's a horrible predicament for any person to be in any country or ally or a friend of ours.
And Behnam, we'll start with you, but this question's for everyone. What do we? We're going to pull out the crystal ball and the magic 8-ball. What do we think the Iranian response is going to be to this? Because any response from Hamas, from Hezbollah, is going to be dictated by Iran. Especially given the fact that they just took a major black eye on their own soil with that assassination. I can't stress it enough, and we've all said it. This is really like at a point, everyone knows that Haniyeh, that the Israelis wanted him. The Israelis have said it from day one that they were going to try to get him. And they said, if I recall, I'm paraphrasing here, they said, we'll get him anywhere. We can get him. And they got him in Tehran. So the Iranians certainly, in my estimation, don't want this to happen again on their soil, but they can't look weak. What do you think do you think the Iranian response will be to this, if any?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. There's already two things that were put out. One is comments by Supreme Leader Khamenei, and then the other is essentially an IRGC press release. But before we get to that, I want to read you this line. I believe it is from Iran's president, Pezeshkian, who, as you know, was one of the last major officials to be with Haniyeh publicly. And it's a heck of a line because it explains the ethos of where the regime is right now and how they actually, we talk about, they're doing their 3 days of mourning and they're planning, but This is as much soulcraft for these guys as it is statecraft. And here's the line by Pezeshkian. He said, "Yesterday I raised his victorious hand, and today I must take his body on my shoulders." These guys believe what they say. The point of this line is that they believe it. And because they believe it, I think when Khamenei uses the word like he was a guest in my house, he uses the word guest, that stuff they take seriously. There are jokes among Afghan watchers that the Taliban almost lost control and engaged in a 20-year war with the international community, with the West, with America, because the Pashtuns wanted to protect some Arab guys who were quote-unquote guests in their house. So it is entirely plausible to take these kind of sociocultural things to the end definition. Khamenei used the word, a variation of the word hard revenge. He used the word severe punishment. Hard revenge was the word the regime used to define how they would respond to the Soleimani operation, and it's kind of been a code word for how they might do business the rest of the time. We're at a crossroads. In a post-April 13, April 14 world, what the regime wants, and precisely what we're talking about is what they want the world to have to factor in that there could be another overt, kinetic, direct attack. And that is something that they will artfully dangle. Now, the IRGC statement said that there will be a response from the axis of resistance, but that there will also be a specific response from quote-unquote Islamic Iran. Does that mean overt or covert? Does that mean kinetic or cyber? Does that mean phased to supplement what the axis of resistance is doing? Does that mean the response is active or passive? Maybe more of what the Israelis talk about, and seems to be what they fear, is the unification of the fronts, much more so than we've seen before. I mean, lest we forget, between the killing of Shukr and the killing of Haniyeh, there was, for the first time ever, and Joe and I, we kicked this idea around before, the first confirmed ballistic missile attack by the Iraqi Shia militias against Israel. These are slow changes in the daily battle space. So perhaps Hajizadeh was not in Syria. Perhaps he is thinking through how best to run another April 13, April 14 operation. But again, what's the phrase? Facing off while saving face. Not spiting your own face, not cutting off your own nose to spite your own face. You could have a lot more of the same, where they hit the gas and the brakes at the same time. A 3-day warning period certainly does give the U.S. and the Israelis and the Arabs quite a bit of time to prepare, as does any kind of lag that would follow. I certainly don't think Iranian officials will stay quiet for 3 days. Then we're going to hit the weekend. Then the Iranians may respond on the back end. So let's watch and wait, but it could go literally either way, proxy or direct. And the fact that we can't pinpoint, or the fact that we don't have confidence in it, is where they want us. The regime, I would say, was successful between April 1 and April 13, when there was almost 2 weeks of panic in Israel as to what it is that Iran might do. The Iran benefits the most by having that panic resume, or potentially overconfidence resume, thinking that everything could be intercepted, and the same architecture that existed before will magically reappear again. Because if Hajizadeh said, okay, of the 300 projectiles, 100 missiles were fired, 50% failed, 4 to 7 got through based on the images, and they actually all hit their targets, well, maybe we need to fire 200, such that 100 land, such that 14 end up hitting their targets. And maybe this time, allegedly, the warheads are unitary and not cluster munitions. And there are all these things about warheads that can carry 750-kilogram payloads being filled only to 400 or 450. None of that was confirmed, but potentially that could make its way through here.
Maybe we coordinate those attacks with Hezbollah and the Iraqi militias and the Houthis to make it all the more difficult to shoot down those missiles. And I'll say this. I just hope they don't do it on the weekend because I'm really tired of everyone. I mean, we have a presidential assassination. The president withdraws from the race.
I'm traveling.
I'm just tired of these guys wrecking my weekends. Can just do something on a Tuesday or a Wednesday here, people.
I am traveling this weekend, so I'd like to. I'm going to a retirement ceremony, and like from one of my bros who's did 30 years in the military. God bless him. 32 years retired, and I would if I could put in a request, like give it a while. I'd like to travel.
We say not only are these people evil, but they're inconsiderate.
That's exactly
and they really need to stop wrecking our weekends.
That's right.
Here. Now, all kidding aside, I mean, I think we definitely need to be braced for the response. And Behnam, you had said something about do these deaths help them in the long run? Are they tactical losses but strategic wins? You had Pakistan, China, Russia, and all coming out and basically condemning Israel's strike. Other countries as well have come out and condemned Israel for carrying out these attacks. And this is where I say, not only is the military noose tightening around Israel, but that political noose is as well, with the pressure from, what do we call it? Should we call it the global South? I don't know what the right term is. Is that the 2000s term? But many nations are beginning to align either to be adversarial to Israel or maybe even possibly put them in the enemy camp. And I think that's a dangerous development for Israel. And for me, it's all the reason why they need to defeat Hamas now.
Yes.
They need to resolve the Hezbollah problem now, because these problems aren't going to get easier for Israel, and they're not going to, and opposition to Israel here politically in the United States as well. It's just going to get 5 years from now. It's going to be more difficult for Israel to get support. 10 years from now, even more difficult unless things change. I'm going to open it up. You guys, any parting shots here before we wrap it up? Start with you, Joe.
I'm just looking forward to seeing what Hassan Nasrallah is going to say tomorrow. He's going to speak. At least that's what's being reported at 5 o'clock local time in Beirut. So wherever you are, just so you know. So something to watch and listen. Let's see what he says. Right? There may be an inkling there of what the response will be. Right? Will Hezbollah respond? Will there be two different responses here, right? From Hezbollah for the killing of Shukri, and then separately Iran for killing Haniyeh, or is this going to be some type of coordinated action? I don't know, but nonetheless, I know one thing for sure is that as far as Haniyeh, Hamas can't muster a response. They can't. So Iran is, as we've talked about before, Iran's going to bear that weight, right? Is going to take that responsibility for several reasons. So interesting to watch, see what Nasrallah says tomorrow, and we'll see what happens over the next coming days, right?
Yeah, I that's absolutely right. Hamas can't really, it's dependent now on its allies in the axis of resistance. Let's see if they step up for him. Behnam, any parting thoughts?
Honestly, there's going to be a funeral ceremony for Haniyeh in Tehran tomorrow. I'm interested to see what IRGC officials show up versus if they're too scared, given what we've talked about with these punctured security services, as well as to what this new president, now we have to say, will talk about. There's a hardline Tehran paper I read. It's a daily. It's called Vatane Emruz. So because it's a print edition, the news is always a couple hours behind. But the headline today, based on a photo from earlier yesterday, was a picture of Pezeshkian holding up Haniyeh's hand. And Pezeshkian's other hand was a fist, and Haniyeh's other hand was a peace sign. And in big Persian letters, it says above it, "I swear by the resistance." So let's see where the resistance, quote-unquote, axis features in this cycle of violence here, because I don't think it's the end of it.
Behnam, real quick, you sure that wasn't a victory sign?
The V for victory sign?
Yeah. Just checking. And we'll give you the final.
You know what it was? It's a 7. In Persian Arabic, V is a 7. Maybe he's sending us some secret, coded message. 7.
He's coding to his bros in Hamas, right? I got it. Okay. Will, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how the negotiations go from here. Like how this attack will put pressure or not put pressure on the various political leaders, from Biden to even the presidential debate, and also looking at it for Bibi's sake, his own domestic political base, how that will work. I mean, was it on Monday that they had the protesters come through the base? That was kind of a little bit of a big deal for him. I'm interested to see what his political opponents will do with this as well. I know when I was there that to bring them home, I saw the protesters walking down the highway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. So I'm interested to see how this all plays out and what type of pressure he's going to have to make a deal from us and also from the Israeli people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it certainly has to be a boost to Netanyahu, but it makes bringing those prisoners home all the more difficult. So it's a win and a loss for Netanyahu all at the same time. Will, safe travels. Give your friend all our best here from Generation Jihad, and look forward to speaking to you again next week. Behnam, we'll talk again next week. Joe, next week. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can listen to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.